I try very hard when we have our great Lenten lecture series not to give a lecture. You hear me basically every Sunday, which is more than enough. Many of you have told me that, and you're not wrong. But nonetheless, we had a space this year that we had to fill, and I do feel that it's important for us to have a lecture or a discussion every Sunday during Great Lent. This is really a time of reflection, and so this gives us a little extra time to spend together and to talk about spiritual things. So, rather, I didn't want to lecture at you. I give a sermon kind of at you, and when I gave my last lecture, it was kind of, at you at the marriage retreat. And that's the nature of a lecture, but I don't really want to do that today. I would much rather have a conversation, because I think this is a very interesting topic. And the topic is the veneration of the Mother of God. And you may say, well, we know all about that. Like, she's ours. Okay, I get that. But, nonetheless, there is a veneration of the Mother of God outside the Orthodox Church, and I think it's important for us to kind of understand that. And some of it, I guarantee you, will be surprising to you. So, let's start with the Roman Catholic Church, because that's the one that we kind of know the most. We have the most probably Roman Catholic friends, or maybe Protestant, depends on where you live. You might not know that Washtenaw County has the largest population per capita of Roman Catholics in the United States. Isn't that interesting?
Please repeat that, Father. I'm sorry.
Washtenaw County has the largest population of Roman Catholics per capita in the United States. The reason for that is we don't have that many people here, but we do have a lot of Catholics here. So there's certainly more Catholics in other places, but when you compare them to the rest of the population, here they are per capita, the highest number. So that's pretty interesting. And so we have a lot of opportunity to interact with Roman Catholics, and I think it's good for us to kind of understand a little bit how this important concept is treated in their church. Now, I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. I'll keep yelling, but I can't guarantee that I'll make it through the whole thing. So if we could just take it down a notch, I would appreciate that. So, the Roman Catholic veneration of the Mother of God was basically the same as the Orthodox veneration of the Mother of God until the churches split. After that, there is a concept in the Roman Catholic Church called the development of dogma. And in short, what this means is that people who live today could have a different set of core beliefs than people who lived in the time of the apostles and still attain salvation. That those things can change over time. That sounds funny to us, but it's important to understand it, because otherwise the next thing we're going to talk about won't make any sense. So, the veneration of the Mother of God has changed over time in the Roman Catholic Church. It makes sense based on what I just said, right? It hasn't stayed static. So at first, it was very similar to the way that we look at the Mother of God, which we'll talk about last, by the way. But over time it changed. And so there was a very serious conversation in the 80s, theological debate actually taking place in the Roman Catholic Church about whether the Mother of God should be considered God. That is, whether we should change from having a Holy Trinity to a Holy Quaternity. Now, that never made it to prime time. That decision was not made, but there was there were a lot of theological papers written about that. There was a lot of symposia that talked about this. So this was nothing. It was even in Time or Newsweek, can't remember. But it was a real conversation. It's not just was a throwaway like some crazy theologian, some itinerant preacher running around in the street. No, it was a real conversation that was taking place. So, as has happened with Christ, different sort of aspects of the Mother of God have become sanctified in the Roman Catholic Church. So you have the Sacred Heart of Mary now, the veneration of the Sacred Heart of Mary. 150 years ago, it didn't exist. There was no such thing. Same as the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It also did not exist 150 years ago. And in fact, the Roman Catholic Church fought against this sort of piecemeal veneration of the Lord and of his mother, but they kind of lost out, and it became so popular, such a popular veneration that it was recognized. There is a concept called the Immaculate Conception within the Roman Catholic Church, and what it basically boils down to, without going into an hour-long lecture, is that the Mother of God really didn't have a choice about whether she would bear Christ or not. That was imposed upon her, in that she couldn't choose not to accept being the Mother of God. That's a very big difference between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic appreciation of the Mother of God. We look at her as the sort of most important saint, basically, I would say. Someone who had complete free will and chose, as I mentioned in the sermon, to become the Mother of God. But in the Roman Catholic Church, that pure free will is not there. That is more imposed upon her than the way that we look at that. And that has a lot of implications. Because if her free will is taken away, then what about us? What part does free will play? Because free will for a Christian is the most important thing. God will not take away our free will. Right? We always talk about two things happen in the world. What God wills and what God allows. Right? What God allows are bad things often that we use our free will to choose. But God will not deprive us of our free will, because that's what makes us in his image. Right? When we talk about man being in God's image, we have a free will to choose to love God or not. So taking away the free will is not possible. And so that makes a real interesting and difficult kind of theological conversation between Roman Catholic theologians and Orthodox theologians about the Mother of God. Because we value most highly her free will and her choice to take on this ministry, this cross. And that's a little different in the Roman Catholic Church. So that's the Roman Catholic Church. So dogma is developing after the church is split. Then there is the Protestant Reformation. Very strong renunciation of all of this. Not just this new dogma, but all of it. Just, it all goes. And so in the Protestant world, there is a variation. I'm going to be a little bit general here because you just can't cover every little iteration. But basically, the Mother of God is looked at as just a woman. Like, she played her part in the divine play, but she has no, necessarily, she's not a saint per se. Now, it depends on which Protestant church you're in, absolutely. Some would argue about the virgin birth and say it's impossible, it's irrational, if you can't think it and make sense of it. But that's not all of them. Protestantism is a very wide sort of swath of understanding, from those who might be closer to an Orthodox understanding to those who would be very far away from it. But in general, the Mother of God doesn't have really a special place in Protestantism, at least in Luther's, and well, for sure in Calvin's. You can argue kind of ad nauseum about what comes after Luther. Are they Protestants or are they sects? And you can just, but we're not going to have that conversation. I'm just saying it's a different kind of way to look at it. But the bottom line is that generally the Mother of God is not venerated for her sanctity in the Protestant church. So that's Protestantism. Now, Islam. Probably didn't think we were going to talk about this. Mother of God is venerated in Islam, especially by women, especially in more folk kind of Islam, but actually, really, by most Muslims. Maybe not Wahhabis. They're very, very strict. This is basically the Saudi Arabian or, Saudi Arabian Peninsula sort of Islam. But most Muslims have a veneration for the Mother of God, and some have a very strong veneration for the Mother of God. There's a Russian Orthodox priest who used to live in, I'll think of it, in Central Asia anyway. And he found the church because he came to venerate the icon of the protection of the Mother of God. He heard the hymns being sung as he walked by the church to the Mother of God, and because in his family they had a pretty strong veneration of the Mother of God, he came in. And he was so touched by what happened there that eventually he became an Orthodox Christian and became a priest. So there is a veneration for the Mother of God in Islam. And if you read the Quran, it's obvious that she plays a special place. Virgin birth exists in Islam. Amazingly, a virgin birth does not mean that Christ is God, but that's a whole other lecture that we can talk about. But it's anyway, I think it's very interesting that there is a veneration for the Mother of God in Islam. Remind me of the question.
But if they venerate strongly Mother of God, they must venerate also Jesus Christ, even stronger, right?
Well, he has. Well, you would think it would be even stronger, but in fact, it's less. He is considered a prophet, one of. Oh, it's either 300 or 600. I forget. I'm sorry, but it begins from Adam and Abraham, and all those are considered prophets. Abraham is considered the first Muslim, but anyway, the point is that it's interesting that really in folk Islam, for sure, the veneration of the Mother of God is significantly stronger than the veneration of Christ. Christ is a controversial figure in Islam, for many reasons.
Why the Mother of God?
Yes, but it's really interesting that exists, yet the veneration for Christ is less. But anyway, so that's a place you might not have expected to find a veneration for the Mother of God. Now let's talk about the Orthodox approach to the Mother of God. As I mentioned, the concept of free will is very important when we are talking about the Mother of God. Now there's a big controversy about how do we look at her sinlessness, or was she sinless, or was she not? There's not a dogma about this. A lot of times we think that there is. That there's a dogma is something that it's a core belief. God is the Holy Trinity. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Those are dogmas, like really heavy, important core beliefs that we have that would make up basically what we find in the symbol of faith, right? So there isn't a dogma about that. There is an understanding, and the fathers are pretty much of one mind in this regard, that the Mother of God chose not to sin. Not that she was without, like the ancestral sin that we all are born with, but that she chose not to sin, although she could have. But again, this is not something that we would say is a dogma. That is, that if we don't believe that, therefore we will not attain the heavenly kingdom. No, that's not true. But there is a very strong feeling and teaching in the church that is maybe like 2 steps or 1 step short of a dogma that says that the Mother of God chose not to sin. She could have, but she didn't. And if you think about it, by sort of looking at it slightly from the side, why would God choose her if she wasn't somewhat remarkable, right? Like, do you think that, God was with the quarter and said, okay, oh, it's her. It was, God doesn't make those decisions like that. There was a rationale, a reason that God chose her. And it is because she is a very special person. But again, sometimes, especially when people come from outside the church, they are told, you must believe that the Mother of God was without sin. That's not true. That's not the case. That you must believe that. Most people do, and most of the fathers do. But this is not something that we must impose on people who come from outside the church who are accepting the faith. There's plenty that they have to accept. It's not necessary to add additional things, and in fact it's not helpful to add additional things. Just sort of set up walls for people. Especially if someone is coming from a little bit more rational kind of, not that we're irrational, but like a more logic-based kind of faith system. We have to work with people and help them to be able to accept the faith and not to add extra burdens to them in addition to the faith that they are accepting. So that's pretty much the lecture portion of this. So John, I think, had his hand up first, and then Olga and Methodius.
So how does that how does that not sort of verge on whatever heresy it is, Arianism?
I can't even hear you, John. 1 second, everyone. I know that it's been a long day, but we have to give John his due here.
Whatever heresy it is that sort of comes, that one of the two that just kind of comes back again and again. The one that says that I guess that Christ was
a creature, like Arianism.
Well, yeah, so that we can by deciding not to sin, we don't need the divine sacrifice of Christ, and that he wasn't, you know, the Son of God and stuff. If we say that, you know, well, Mary didn't, I mean, I know she's special and all that, but Mary didn't sin, even though she could have, and then what's there to stop, you know, other people from saying, well, you know, I just got to try really hard, and I won't, you know, sin either, and won't need Christ.
Right. This is why the church does not impose this as a dogma. It's not the fathers with one voice say this, but there is definitely a plurality that would talk about her in these terms. But you are right, it opens the door to some theological paths. If we say impossible that she sinned, actually it would be no different than imposing upon her, taking away her will, her free will. So I think that this is one of those things that as Orthodox Christians we have to be okay with the mystery. You know, as Orthodox Christians we don't spend a lot of time talking about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, because it doesn't matter. It's not a question of our salvation, and so therefore, why should we be wasting our time talking about that stuff? And I think this is one of those things too. Not to be flippant, but I really think that we can get caught up in some of these theological arguments that actually have basically zero impact on our salvation and waste a lot of good time and effort and become proud. So, in any case, I think it's a really good point, Sean. Olga, you were next.
Я по-русски говорю. Хорошо. Я считаю, что самое главное, вот, в силу того, что я была протестантом, потом стала ортодокс, я считаю, что вот самое главное в Mother of God это то, что несмотря, ну, то есть ее пример, несмотря на то, что она должна была быть побита камнями, позор ложился на ее семью, и то есть она должна была принять смерть и позор, и она согласна, единственная, кто был согласен воспринять позор и смерть за то, что ей ангел, то есть она поверила ангелу, поверила Богу. И вот это вот символ, что мы должны как бы за Христа готовы принять смерть, позор. Это столько веры в ней было, это пример веры вообще. Как бы и естественно, что мы должны поклоняться в любой религии, в протестантской это поклоняться вере, потому что мы верующие люди. И как бы если даже католиков, протестантов делить, это я считаю, что Mother of God это самый большой пример веры, смирения, покаяния и жертвенности.
So Olga was saying that when she was a Protestant and she became Orthodox, that for her the most important thing was the example of the Mother of God, her faith, her willingness to suffer, and I might forget some of the things that she said, but basically that it was her example that was the most important thing to her. And of course, what is a saint? Is a saint a perfect person on this earth? There's only one perfect person on this earth, right? Our Lord. And so the saints also were sinners, but they were sanctified. They became so close to God that His energy began to enlighten them. And the halo that you see around their head, that is the light of Tabor, of the mount where the Lord was transfigured, which shines forth from them. Remember when Moses went up to the mountain and they covered his face? We don't remember that part usually. We remember that he saw God's back, kind of, that no one can see God. But he shone so brightly, the Israelites couldn't even look at him. So they made like a kind of a bag that they put over his head until he stopped shining when he brought the commandments down from the mountain. So this concept of tapping into God's energies and that we can do this, this is how the saints are sanctified, not that they are perfect people. In fact, every one of them, look, St. Mary of Egypt, St. Moses the Hungarian, who is basically the St. Mary of Egypt of the male world. You know, I mean, there's so many.
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine, a good example. There's so many who didn't live a perfect life. And so it's kind of funny that we build up this thing about the saints are perfect, and then say, well, Mother of God must be perfect. One perfect man who lived in this world, and that is Christ. Now, that's not to take away from her sanctity. She's an incredibly important, very holy person, great example for us, as Olga was saying. But we have to kind of delineate between God's perfection and what man can attain in this life. So without taking away from her. So it's a kind of a fine line that we want to be not put ourselves in a funny position. Again, counting angels dancing on the head of a pin.
So Catholics, they say that Anna and Joachim and Anna, they had kind of conception as Mother of God had of her. Is that how I
So here's the difficulty with the concept of the Immaculate Conception. If, let's see, we have a lot of very young ears here. How are we going to say this exactly?
It requires a preceding Immaculate Conception.
Yes, like where does it stop? What was if the grandparents also were participating in this Immaculate Conception? Is that necessary, or great grandparents, or like at what point does the sinful nature of what word do we use to oh, biblically knowing your wife? At what point does that? At what point does that sinfulness, which is considered in the West, where does it stop? Like how many generations back would that have to have been an Immaculate Conception to make hers also immaculate? That's for an Orthodox mind, for an Orthodox theologian, that's the first question that you ask. Okay, well there it happened once, but what about them? Did they bring something to the relationship of that sinfulness? Because in the Orthodox world, we talk about ancestral sin. In the Western world, they talk about original sin, and it's a very, very different concept. The concept of original sin is basically a stain. It's basically a sinfulness that is imparted from generation to generation to generation by husbands and wives biblically knowing each other. But in the Orthodox Church, we don't think of it that way. It's more of an inclination to sin. That the ancestral sin is this sort of, our sort of inclination is really the best word, our sort of desire to sin. But not, that we are conditioned to do that, but not that we are guilty of that sin of Adam. We are not guilty of Adam's sin. Come on. That doesn't make any sense. But the fact that Adam sinned and the world changed, okay, that is true going forward for every generation. The inclination to sin that came into the world as part of death coming into the world and everything else, that's part of the fall that we all live in. We live in this fallen world. But we are not stained. An inclination is different than a sort of, disease. Kind of. Curtis and then Dima.
It seems to me I heard somewhere the deceiver told Eve that no, you will not die, which is not a lie. You will become like God, knowing good and evil. Okay, so this would mean that this extension of something that belonged to God comes to us.
Well, certainly the church teaches that we are made in God's image.
Yeah.
But we often like to say we are made in God's image and likeness. Okay, that's what it says in the first part of the Genesis. The likeness is what we can attain.
Deification.
Exactly. That is our potential, is God's likeness. Being made in God's image is our free will. But we can attain to that likeness or not attain to that likeness, depending on how we decide to live our lives. So that's a really important understanding for us. Remember, ancient Hebrew, very simple language, not very many words. So the church has always understood that when it says man is made in God's image and likeness, that man is made in the image and the likeness is what we can attain or not, depending on how we live our lives.
What is the difference between the protection that saints and Mother of God can give to us? What is because there's, in some prayers, there's addressing of the saints is always saints such and such, please pray for us, and for Mother of God.
This is a very good question. I'm glad you brought it up. I wanted to talk about it, but I forgot. So, we say in our prayers, O most holy Mother of God, save us, right? This means not save us like only God can save us. Like that God can grant us the heavenly kingdom. That's not what it means. It means save us from difficulties on this earth, save us from this war, save us from this. So Mother of God cannot grant salvation. that's not possible. If we remember her dormition and how she appeared to the apostles, remember, as usual, Thomas was late, remember? And he wanted to see her, and she appeared to them, and they could see her in heaven, just like, you know, when Stephen was martyred and he could see. So they could see her, and she spoke to them and said, I will always intercede for you before the throne of my Son. Okay, being an intercessor and being God are two very different things. She, as the Mother of God, is right there in the icons. I don't see one, that we may not have one right out here. But when you have Christ, when you have Christ sitting on his throne, it's always St. John the Baptist on one side and Mother of God on the other side. So we understand that even though it's a heavenly sort of geography, there is a geography. And even we hear about this in the New Testament, that my father's house, my father's mansion has, no. Yes, the house has many mansions, right. So it's, what it means, and what the church has always understood that to mean, is that there is a delineation of glorification in the next world, right? Such as me, I'm hoping to kind of sneak in when the door opens and nobody's looking. But others are there standing right beside the throne of the Lord, and those are saints, and the Mother of God is always pictured in the icons as standing right beside Christ. That means something to us. Iconography is not just a pretty picture. That is part of the tradition of the church with the big T. And remember, it was only 2 generations ago when a majority of people were literate in Western society. Before that, in Western and all societies, most people were illiterate. And so iconography was a very important expression of the faith, the truths of the church. So always having the Mother of God there expresses the teaching of the church, that she is very close to Christ, and that therefore, when we ask her intercession, she will be sort of, for lack of a better metaphor, whispering this into the ear of her Son. Matthias, you had a question?
Father, did you talk about problems within our own tradition that have arisen regarding the veneration of the Mother of God?
I didn't, but, you know, it's true that there have been issues in the Orthodox Church about the veneration of the Mother of God, imparting unto her too much sort of sanctification, almost putting her on equality of the Godhead, which of course completely blasphemes her, because if you're taking away her free choice, what kind of example is that? She happened to be in the right place at the right time to be the divine robot? Come on. That's actually, but you know, in a sort of, in an illiterate society, in a society where communication was very poor from the center to the provinces, and especially in the Russian church, there were these kind of things would pop up from time to time. Yeah, another one which is very kind of, can't seem to get rid of it, is this veneration of the name of God. That's, if you don't read theological things, you might not know that, and it's not a big deal. But there are some sort of things that would come up when you were in some place very far away and there was nobody to correct you. If an error persists and persists and persists, it starts to take on the form of dogma, quote unquote, even though that's not a dogma of the church. That's how you do.
I have a question and then a comment which is unrelated, so let me ask the question.
Okay.
So about the Mother of God, I heard from hearsay, can't remember where I read it, that when Dormition occurred, that she was bodily taken in heaven. So this is what, this is the ultimate level of sainthood. So although she's one of the saints, but she's still got that special distinction. So I wanted to clarify.
Yes, this is even something a little bit controversial in the church, but in general that is understood that was the case. And yes, it's a special distinction, but again, this doesn't quite rise to the level of dogma, where the church would say, absolutely, you must believe that to attain salvation. But that is the understanding.
The tradition of the Orthodox.
Yeah, and with a big T, it's a pretty strong tradition.
And my question was unrelated because it's about Islam.
Yes.
I just wanted to share, you know, something that I witnessed. So when I was in Jerusalem, in traveling around the city, so we stopped at one place and there was a mosque And our guide said this is a mosque dedicated to the Virgin Mary. So, and it was built, it is built, it exists. It is built on the place where there was a well, where by legend when she was a child, she was getting water from that well. And so inside there's a well, you know, it's enshrined, and it is dedicated to Virgin Mary. So I thought it was kind of a very striking proof that she was venerated.
That's interesting. I did not know that.
And I can show you some pictures I took. And one little comment about the name. So Jesus Christ in Muslim tradition is called Isa ben Miriam. Did you know that?
Say it again.
He's called Isa, meaning
Isa,
Jesus, ben Miriam.
Isa.
Ben Miriam. Miriam is Mary.
Right.
So he's the only person whose kind of patronymics his mother, not father. Because normally they're like, you know, Ali ben
Ali.
Joseph.
Hassan.
Whatever.
Ali ben Hassan. So it would be the name of the man plus the name of the father. But Jesus in Muslim tradition is called Isa ben Miriam. So I just know that wanted to share.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Did anyone have other questions? We're going to have to
Well, that's what they had said. There's me.
Okay, friends, we were doing so good at the beginning. Other questions or comments? Methodist.
Father, very quickly, I have some dear friends that happen to be Roman Catholic, and I was in a discussion with them recently, they know when I come up and I open up my truck, there's a large icon of the Mother of God before me at all times. So we have a lot in common, we can talk about things, but I realized quickly in our discussion that their theology regarding, and their adoration, their whole feeling toward the Mother of God is based upon modern dogmatic development. And that they don't, that their understanding of who she is doesn't predate those changes. And that their whole view of her is based upon novelty constructions that we would say are not acceptable.
That's true, but that's because the concept of in Roman Catholicism is different than what ours are. We're trying to hold to the faith that the apostles had, whereas it's completely acceptable in the Roman Catholic Church to change that. So for them, that's an okay thing. For us, it seems funny because we're trying not to do that. We obviously don't hold to the traditions. You know, like there are some traditions from apostolic times that still impact us, but we don't wear like the clothes that the apostles wore, and we don't wear the, you know, that kind of stuff doesn't matter. You know, like the vestments that the priests wear, that's changed so many times. That's not a dogmatic, question. But the faith, to hold to the faith that the apostles had, that is what we are striving to do.
That's why the catechumen have the creed to recite when they're brought in.
Exactly. The creed is, as Father Zacharias so nicely said in his Lenten lecture several years ago, is basically our fight song. Right? How many of us know our school fight song? Everybody knows the victors. We're not going to sing it now. Maybe after last night we should, but anyway, that's our fight song. We should know that better than we know the victors or any other song. The Nicene Creed, and that is the best explication of our faith in a short form.
So coming back to Anna and Joachim and Anna, so they tried so long, right? So they were not virgins, none of them, right? Neither of them, right? So
Yes,
how can you come up with the thing that they've been immaculate?
When you have to, you have to.
I think so. This is an interesting conversation that is going to be on a slight tangent, and that's just kind of the different way. No, I'm going to say right now, I know a lot of Roman Catholic people, and I respect them very much. They have a very strong faith. They really care about their faith. They're a great example to us in many ways. We don't necessarily theologically agree on everything, but I don't have any bad feelings about Roman Catholic people. But that sort of idea of developing dogma and so on and so forth, once you kind of open that can of worms, there's no stopping it. It's like ringing a bell. You can't unring the bell. So once you start to have this, that this is on the table, that you can sort of change anything that you want to if you can make a rational argument for it, that it's hard to stop it.
And then it says, on Mary, after Archangel, the Holy Spirit came up on her.
Yes.
Nothing like that was described.
No, nothing like that in the church's tradition at all. Helen, you had a question?
Just to make a comment that one of the things that is a difficult spot is if you're talking to Catholics who's quite knowledgeable about their faith.
Yes.
Will often say that these changes were inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Like, their confidence. And it's very hard to say anything. They said, well, they felt that the Holy Spirit moved them to make these changes. So
Right. And
that
is very difficult to have a conversation with someone about that to say, well, we know better. But one thing we can say, and it's important for us to understand this, especially as Pentecostalism begins to really grow. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening, but especially from the South, Pentecostalism is growing like crazy. And we think South, oh yeah, Atlanta. No, I mean South America. And coming north. And it's a huge movement. So it's important for us to understand, and we often talk about this at Pentecost when we talk about the descent of the Holy Spirit. There's lots of spirits. There's not just the Holy Spirit. There's all kinds of spirits out there that are motivating people to do things. And so I'm not saying that, that this is what's happening, but we have to understand that in the spiritual world, as St. Paul says, we have to check the spirits. We have to test the spirits. We can't just say, oh, I had a feeling, and therefore because I had a feeling, that must have been from God. Well, I hate to break the news to you, that could also be coming from the other side. So you bringing this up gives me an opportunity to say that. I'm not accusing that that's always what's happening. But we can't just kind of say, oh, I was at this place and I was moved, and therefore it must be a holy place. We have to be way more, I don't want to say skeptical, but careful than that.
About that, is that one of the reasons why Orthodox hold on the tradition and Holy Fathers that there is a dogma that Holy Spirit does not contradict himself? So whatever had been said in the past cannot be contradicted.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not a Holy Spirit.
Right, and this is a huge difference between the Roman Catholic and the Orthodox Church. Again, I'm not trying to defame them. I'm just saying it's a different way to look at faith. It's a way that seems funny to us because we're trying to hold true to what Christ gave to the church, whereas it's totally acceptable and wonderful and marvelous and okay in the Western world to change these things. So
without contradiction, it's fine.
Right.
Well,
even I think I agree with you, but I think in the West that's not as much of a concern.
But that could be a counter.
Yeah, that would be a good thing to bring up. That's it.
Cannot contradict because it's scripture.
Oh, простите.
There's no time.
So that's a very good question. So Asmik is asking, okay, there are theological differences between us and the Roman Catholics. She says, between us and others also, and can we find kind of a general language or a common language to speak? And absolutely, the answer is absolutely. We don't sort of say to these people, like, you're evil, I can't be in the same room with you or in the same county with you, or not at all. We have so many things in common with other Christians that it's very important for us to work together in those areas where we share commonalities. Serving the poor, life issues. Even though we take a different kind of perspective on that, still nonetheless there are certain things where we can work together. other sort of social things where we share a common language. So there are a lot of places that we share a common language with others of faith, and we should absolutely stress that commonality. Not say, okay, you know, like I'll use you for my problem, but then I don't want anything to do with you. No, we have to have these kind of conversations. If we want to bring people to the church, it's our example that's going to do that. We have to be good Christians, not just theologically correct Christians. There's a big difference. I'm trying to think of one of the... It's one of the professors from Jordanville, maybe Father Michael Pomazanski, I can't remember. He was commenting on something one of the students had written, a dogmatic piece. Yeah, I think it was him. And he said, I have no doubt that this student is fully Orthodox, but I question whether he's a Christian. Because he had such a rough way of explicating what he was saying, that he was right. What he said was correct, but the way he said it was not really a very Christian way. And to me, that has always stuck with me. That's so important. You know, not only do we have to have a theologically appropriate set of beliefs, but we also have to emulate Christ. And, you know, we could talk, and I don't want to just go and go and go. There are several examples where Christ ministered to non-Jews, right? Several where he ministered to non-Jews. And that is an important example for us to understand that we are not to build ourselves a camp where only Orthodox people can be. We have to meet the world and work in the world and interface with the world. If Christ himself was willing to heal pagans, if he was willing to, you know, care for those like Samaritans who were completely despised by the Jews, goodness gracious, if he's willing to do that, then cannot we at least be Christians even while we're Orthodox? So I think that's a really, really important point. So thank you for bringing that up.
Father, I want to come alongside what you just said with some anecdotal evidence. I myself, having a tendency to be pretty hard-shelled, have found that just as the Mother of God was the unburnt bush, where heaven and earth came together, she has become for me a help at softening me in order to take the truth of our faith to people that I would otherwise have probably argued with. So I'm constantly thinking of her and praying to her as I'm trying to take the truth of our faith to people, that I can do it in a way that is becoming and in a way that is befitting of the name. And I think that she is not only our point of contact with fallen people and with fallen ways of thinking and with the world as it is, but I think intentionally so.
But it's important for us to have examples. If we are sort of struggling in this world and not seeing any end to this struggle, not seeing any success to this struggle, when we see those that the Lord has glorified in heaven and on earth, Mother of God first and foremost, this provides us really a lot of comfort and understanding that our struggles are not in vain, that others who have struggled also have attained the heavenly kingdom. So, and especially with struggle being such a core part of our Orthodox faith, that we aren't just kind of sitting around and waiting for God to throw, you know, lightning bolts down and, you know, burn up our enemies and then we will rule the world. It's not going to be like that. We are to struggle in our faith and to come closer to God. So seeing those who had done that and who God has glorified on the earth is a really great comfort to us. There's an icon of the Mother of God called Softener of, I think it's, is it evil or hard hearts? Huh? Oh, hard hearts. Hard hearts. Okay.
Evil hearts.
Evil, okay, okay. Other,
Also 7 arrows. 7 arrows.
701, I've seen that one too.
7 arrows.
There are many icons of the Mother of God. Almost all of them, by the way, have what in them or who in them? Christ, right? You almost never see. There are, I think, 3 or 4 recognized prototype icons of the Mother of God. which do not have Christ in the icon, but it's very rare.
Is the one which is young but old and ruling, right? There is one.
I don't know which the one that I can think of that is the one that Saint Seraphim had, you know, in his
Entrance to the temple.
Well, entrance to the temple, that's true, but that would have been impossible for Christ to be in that one. But yes. Other questions, comments, Livia?
Yeah, reading the lives of Russian Orthodox saints, you can easily see that Mother of God wasn't simply one of the saints, one of those saints, but she played a very important role in the salvation of those saints. Could you please elaborate on this?
Yes, that's true. I mean, we sort of think of, okay, Mother of God was brought to heaven and then there she stays. But actually this is not the case. The Mother of God has appeared on many occasions to others who are struggling for sanctity. Saint Seraphim of Sarov is one that I think of right off the top of my head, and there are several others. And it's true that Russia always considered itself to be a home of the Mother of God, like a special place for her to be, especially after Constantinople fell and the Turks had taken over Greece. There was this kind of idea that Russia was not necessarily the Third Rome concept, but this idea that it was very much a place for the Mother of God to be. And so in Russia you find a lot of churches, for instance, which are named after icons of the Mother of God. That's not so common outside Russia, actually. For us it just seems normal. But that's not that common in the rest of the Orthodox world. It doesn't happen that often, whereas in Russia it happens all the time. And as Lilia mentioned, to many of the saints in the sort of Russian saints, the Mother of God played an important role in their sanctification and their coming closer to God. She always is someone who points to her Son, you know, that makes it possible or makes it easier for people to come closer to Christ. But she does play an important role in salvation of many by helping to facilitate that.
What is that about heart in Catholic, that why veneration of the heart?
Well, this is actually something that grew up not that differently from some of the not really appropriate veneration of the Mother of God that you would find in sort of the Russian Empire, in the far reaches, or in some villages or something like that. This was not something that was a top-down imposed thing. It was from the bottom up. First, the veneration of the heart of Jesus began, and then after that was finally allowed after the hierarchy pushed back on that. Then the veneration of the heart of Mary became popular among the people. So it's hard to say what the theological desire is that comes from that. It's really more, at least in its beginnings, just a popular veneration, a way to venerate the Mother of God. But the heart sort of being the organ of the soul, I guess. That's the reason I would say for focusing veneration there. But we don't make such differentiations in the Orthodox Church of sort of that venerating some part of the saint or the Lord. It's a different tradition. You know, like there is a veneration of the Eucharist in the West. Just like you come and meditate in front of you is the Eucharist, and you just kind of are in the church meditating on that. It's just a completely different concept than in the East, than in the Orthodox Church.
And then the Catholics, they do have, they talk that she appeared, you know, so is that true that she appeared to them? I mean, it's, even if they venerate.
So, this is a really interesting question, and we talked about this a lot in seminary. And the question is every apparition of the Mother of God, because it's her, therefore valid? Well, St. Paul says that, you know, the devil can appear even as an angel. Like, is it impossible for the devil also to impersonate Mother of God or some other saint? Why not? Why not? So again, I think the most important thing is this sort of, we have to test the spirits. If we feel that we are worthy of having God appear to us, we can be certain that that will not be God who appears to us. That's a safe thing to say for sure. But we have to look at the context of these things. Like in Fatima, the big thing was, you know, we have to, it's important that you bring the faith to Russia. Okay. Not that Russia is so great, but you don't have to be like an historical genius to understand that the Russians are already Christians. So what's going on there? So we just have to, the fathers talk a lot about how we will be punished more for being gullible than for being a little skeptical. And so when St. Paul says try the spirits, a lot of times we read in the lives of the saints in connection with that the real test is the cross. So if there is something that's, if we have some revelation or something appears to us, the cross. Is the cross there? Then that's something that we can begin to already have a lot of confidence in. If it's not, doesn't mean that it's not legitimate, but we should be very, very careful.
You mean as a part of the vision or whatever? Okay.
That's God's sign. If there is no cross, we have to be very skeptical. So, I mean, not very few of us, or maybe it's just me and all of you do have these visions, but I hope not. Very few of us have this issue where we have to test the spirits. But we can do that also historically and kind of say, okay, well, this happened, and this apparition, whatever it was it the Mother of God, was it not, said, you know, you should destroy this evil city. I'm just making this up, by the way. Right away we should be thinking, okay, well, wait a second. Now, is that really like usually the kind of Mother of God stuff? Right. We have to use the brain that the Lord gave us. Just because we're praying doesn't mean we take out our brain and put it away. We shouldn't be purely rational creatures. We want our heart, we want our faith to live in our heart. It's true. But we also, you know, just can't be blindly gullible. So we have to kind of weigh these things and be careful about these things. And if we're a little skeptical and a little undecided being careful, we're going to be a lot less likely to fall into a bad place. And as we see from the lives of the saints, this is not hinder our salvation to be a little skeptical about these things.
Father, could you give a kind of a definition of prelest? Is that the word?
Prelest? Yeah. Prelest. Well, I'm trying to say it in English. I don't know how you would say it in English. Yeah, I guess prelest. It means to be spiritually fooled. And I will use an example from the lives of the saints, and we can extrapolate from there. So there is a young novice, comes to the monastery, begins to struggle in the monastic life. All of a sudden, he begins to have visions of Jesus, who is appearing in his monastic cell every night. And he goes to the abbot and starts to instruct the abbot in the monastic life and say, you know, well, you know, Christ told me this, and you need to do this, and this monk is a bum, you get rid of him. And, okay, immediately after they stop laughing, the fathers are going to say, you know, let's take a step back here. You know, do we think that spiritual life is magic? Of course it's not. This kind of thing where you would have a vision like this is clearly, at this early stage in the spiritual life, it's clearly the devil who is fooling this person. And so that's kind of a classic sort of prelest. But we also can fall into this. You know, it's usually pride hiding itself as humility. You know, so we're very humble, outwardly humble. You know, you know, especially when we want to instruct those who are our superiors, that's usually a very good sort of, that's a good sort of gauge to say probably we are not going down the right spiritual path. Now, this is not to say that someone who is not very, very experienced in the spiritual life cannot have a very spiritual life and cannot, you know, that just because somebody has a position does not mean they can't learn from someone who doesn't have a position. I learned very much from all of you. When you come to confession, I learn a lot of things about my own spiritual life in this way, and it's very enlightening for me. I learn a lot from people who are not priests, especially now in this part of my life when I'm not actively studying in seminary. So we have to be open to learning from everyone. Just because someone can teach us something doesn't mean that they therefore are being spiritually fooled. No. But if I'm calling up the bishop and saying, you know, Vladimir, really, that was a bad decision that you made. And I think next time you should do this. After he stops laughing, he will say, you know, Father Gregory, I think you're being spiritually fooled. You know? So, does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Okay.
When Mary was announced by Gabriel she could have a son,
Yes.
Gabriel didn't have a cross, right? Because cross came up. So how did Mary tell that this is the right?
Yes, so Michaela's question is, when Gabriel appeared to the Mother of God, he was not carrying a cross, and how would she know? Actually, the cross did way predate Christ. The first time that we really see the cross strongly in the Old Testament is when Moses parts the waters of the Red Sea, right?
Yeah.
Does everyone remember? He parts the waters like this, and then when the Egyptians are in there, he closes the water like this, right? And also another very stark foreshadowing of the cross in the Old Testament is when they were being attacked by the snakes, right? And they put the snake on the pole, right? That's a very strong foreshadowing of the cross. Also when the water was bitter and they used the staff to make the water drinkable for the people. There's many, many, many foreshadowings of the cross before Christ is on the cross. But nonetheless, in the icon, where is it? Sometimes you see the archangel carrying, oh, this one has it, okay. He's carrying something, and you always see on the iconostasis, the archangel Gabriel always has something that he's carrying, right? You won't be able to see it. You'll just have to take my word for it. You can see it later. But he's carrying this kind of like a staff. The archangel Michael carries a sword, right? He's the commander of the bodiless hosts. That way, when you look at the iconostasis, you always know which one is Archangel Michael. He's got the sword. Archangel Gabriel doesn't have the sword, but usually the thing that he carries, his staff, is a cross at the top of it. Be that as it may, that's not the only criteria, the only criterion of whether, you know, this was a legitimate vision or not. She asked him questions to try to kind of get to the bottom of what he was proposing. And she began to trust him over time because he was giving the right spiritual answers. So, and that's not the only thing that we should think about. And again, hopefully most of us are not dealing with this on a regular basis, but if we ever did have such a vision, I would certainly be looking for the cross.
So then it's not connected with the occasion.
Okay.
We don't name our children Maria in honor of the Mother of God because she's too close to the Lord, right?
This is a very interesting practice in Russian society, Russian church society. It's true, we do not name our children after the Mother of God. If we have a Maria, then she's named after some other saint. Greeks, on the other hand, are completely the opposite. Panioti, our friend, he's named after the Mother of God. And many, many Greek women would be named after the Mother of God. So it's just a local church kind of tradition, but it just never became the tradition in Russia to name children after the Mother of God.
Okay, so it's just a tradition.
Yeah, yeah.
So if anyone in our parish decides to name their child after the Mother of God,
Political will decide.
okay, so medical would be.
Just because it's just not our tradition, it doesn't mean it's bad. But I would not, at least the first, that's never happened, so at least the first time I would ask.
Okay, so but it wouldn't be like,
Blasphemous?
Right.
No. I mean, the Greeks have many issues, but that's not one of them. It'll be on YouTube, so I'm sure I'll get a lot of it. We always tease our friends the most.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that Catholics have the name Jesus. You know, Jesus in Spanish is a common name, but in Orthodox tradition we never name any.
That is true, we don't. However, there are men It's rare now. This name has fallen completely out of use. But there are men named Jesus. In English, that's Joshua, right? Or yeah, Joshua. So, like, in fact, Joshua was one of our Joshuas was here today. So, if he's being communed Jesus, if it's in Russian.
I thought it was only for monastic. No?
Traditionally, that's the case, but it's not. We are allowed to name children this. It's just very rare. It's very rare, but in America, it's not. Joshua is a very common name. So, in fact, I had to look it up. I didn't know that the name was the same. So, for some reason it happened. I can't remember. I had to figure out what it was.
Joshua.
Yeah, the son of name. So yes, this is a person in the Old Testament. But anyway, it's just a translation thing. John.
I encountered this problem with naming a child Mary in Russia, that they deal with it, maybe it's just the old believers, I'm not sure, but to change the stress on the name, and then it's okay.
Nadia, oh, that's interesting. I believe that it's not done in the Niconian church anyway. So it may be an old believer thing, but it's I've not seen it ever in the non-old believer church. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Other questions? All right, thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate your time.